Look at the Borderlands movies and the Concord video game as recent examples of this. Two things that absolutely nobody asked for. Why did Borderlands fail? Because they took a franchise based on gore, grotesque violence, dark comedy, and basically marketed it for children, not to mention some very questionable acting choices. Why did Concord fail? Because it was a hero shooter released in a very competitive hero shooter landscape that had better offerings and which don't cost $40. But it wasn't just mediocrity that sank the Concord ship. It also committed a cardinal sin, probably the worst one that any studio can make, and another mistake they keep making often, and that is deflecting criticism by insulting their own audience. I will never understand the strategy behind this. It baffles me, to be honest. Here's a tweet from one of the Concord developers calling gamers who complain about their game talentless freaks. Wow, talentless? Maybe, but freaks? Yeah, definitely. Maybe, I don't know, don't insult your potential customer base who is already on edge and weary about your product. That's a surefire way to turn them off. Amandla Stenberg, the lead actress on the Acolyte Star Wars series, which was canceled after just one season, recently said that the show being canceled was not a huge shock after the rampage of vitriol from toxic Star Wars fans. Oh boy, here we go again. No, I think it was canceled because it's... Nobody watched it. It had bad acting, bad script, bad writing, awful child actors, an uncharismatic lead, and cringe-worthy witches singing really, really badly who will forever haunt my nightmares.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many. The power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
So who was the show exactly supposed to be catered to? If it was to a certain audience, guess what? They didn't watch it either. So if you're going to target toxic, racist, misogynistic fans and blame them for its failure, why don't you also go after LGBT and people of color too, since they didn't watch the shit either? Andor, one of the most critically acclaimed Star Wars products, arguably of all time, had two main leads who are people of color. Diego Luna is from Mexico and Adria Arjona is from Puerto Rico. Weird how the racists and misogynists turned out for that one though, right? It's almost like if you tell a great story, have good writing, good leads, good sets, then you'll probably have a good turnout, right? Shocking. Why is this such a hard lesson for these studios to learn? It's honestly like they just cannot help themselves. They think they know better than the actual audience. They had a really good thing going with The Witcher, which had a great lead, Henry Cavill. And then they decided they knew better than the actual author of the damn book and would start changing a couple of things in there, modernize it, whatnot. And guess what? You know how the rest played out. And then, of course, it was blamed on toxic gamers. And when I say toxic gamers, toxic fans, it's always toxic male fans. For some reason, women gamers are just immune to toxicity. Maybe Geralt of Rivia brews them special anti-toxic elixirs. I don't know. It's very disheartening to see studios blame their own failures on the audience. History has shown time and time again that a product's success depends on its quality and merits and not on whether it includes LGBT themes, representation, or any other specific element, really. They can all coexist together, and an audience will be more receptive if the show is good and if these themes are portrayed authentically. Blaming toxic culture is simply a way to deflect criticism and avoid taking responsibility for the studio's own shortcomings. It's really that simple. It's nothing more than a failure to own up to their own mistakes. Full stop. That's my opinion. So we'll get back to mediocrity and why games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring are far more important than ever before. But first, let's talk about gaming toxicity, which is another issue that's being used as a shield to deflect against pretty much any legitimate criticism of bad games. And that issue is identity politics. So there's nothing wrong with trying to bring more inclusivity to video games. We often play video games to escape from the real world. At least I do. To be transported to fantastical lands where we meet amazing characters, make friends, battle foes, embark on epic quests. That's why we love video games, right? We love getting to find out about these characters' lives, stories, their trials and tribulations. Sometimes these characters happen to be gay or trans.
Wield your heat, right?
Sweetest man I ever knew. We were friends before my gender transition.
Or non-binary, it doesn't matter. If they're interesting and well written, their sexual orientation just happens to be another characteristic of theirs, just like all the others. We don't care. We understand that just like in real life, there's all sorts of characters inhabiting these worlds. So there's nothing wrong with trying to bring more inclusivity to them. What I do think is very wrong, though, is when it's done in an inauthentic checkbox sort of way. To me, that just feels very cold, mechanical, routine, passionless. If the first time you're introduced to a character, they're practically yelling their pronouns at you and they're wearing their sexual orientation on their crazy sleeves with their crazy outfits, it makes them look like caricatures. Somebody needs to tell these devs that being flamboyant is not a requirement to be gay. I know because I've actually met and interacted with gay people. I've had gay friends. I've even worked with them. Sometimes you wouldn't even guess they were gay. Shocker. And sometimes they even dressed just like you and me. Let me elaborate a bit on that last point. By no means am I trying to gatekeep queerness and what is or isn't normal behavior. There are plenty of straight, flamboyant people and plenty of gay, very unflamboyant people. I've spoken with some in the LGBT community who don't like that over-the-top portrayal and representation because they said it almost feels like that's what's expected of them in real life, to act in a certain way. So I think it's fine to have that portrayal in some games, and it does seem to be more in hero shooters for obvious reasons, but I believe it's also important to see the other portrayal in characters like Bill and Ellie from The Last of Us. My main point was that studios don't have to give characters very colorful hair or overly flamboyant costumes to basically signal like, hey, I am gay, look at me. And that was basically my entire point. I find it actually a bit insulting to make such broad generalizations of a group of people in the way studios have been with some of these characters they're designing. So I'm not sure who's advising all these studios that keep spitting out the same generic LGBT characters. Studios continue to do this time and time again. Blizzard has an entire mathematical equation, pentagram, star thing to solve queerness and race. Am I the only one that finds that insane and offensive? And Microsoft recently laid out their own genius master plan to tackle this issue. And then you have Sweet Baby Inc. This is the infamous company known for extorting studios that make video games, basically by providing them with consultation during the game's development process to ensure that the game's narrative promotes diversity, equity, inclusion. And how do they do this? Through good old-fashioned fear, intimidation, and threats of cancellation.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
Whew. All right, so what's wrong with all of these approaches? By forcing developers to try and write DEI characters using formulas, spreadsheets, diagrams, all this other bullshit and mathematical, unhuman-like methods will result in soulless, artificial, unrelatable characters, which the audience will feel in the final product. You cannot apply a mathematical formula to a very human issue. The audience will feel like these characters are being shoved down their throats for the sake of pushing an agenda, not for the sake of improving the game or adding any actual value to the story or narrative. We should absolutely have more inclusivity, more LGBT characters in video games, but this is just not the way. The correct way to do this, in my humble opinion, is to make sure these characters have an actual reason to be there, not just for the sake of taking off the box, like all great characters. They should be well written, serve a legitimate purpose, and have a great story that's actually worth telling, like all great characters. Often, that starts with the writers and developers already having a great idea for a character or protagonist and having the time to flesh them out, their origin, their motivation, insecurities, fears, everything that makes them relatable. And then, if they happen to be of a certain race or gender or orientation, that should not matter at all. That shouldn't be the focal point. That can just be another trait of theirs, just like any other great character in gaming. So with that, let me bring up two examples of characters I think were done very right from The Last of Us. So in The Last of Us 1, we have Joel and Ellie, two characters thrust into a situation that neither of them wanted to be in, weary of one another, distrusting of one another. They just don't like each other. So as time goes by and their story takes them through some pretty crazy, treacherous lands, close calls, they start warming up to each other. Joel starts letting his shield down and inquiring more about Ellie. He hasn't done that before because she reminds him of his dead daughter. He doesn't want to get too close. Now he kind of thinks maybe he can protect her. At one point later in the game, when Joel is injured in the winter chapter, Ellie's tending to him. She's trying to keep him like breathing alive, and she's mentioning about a person she cared about. And at that point, nobody knew Ellie's orientation. Many did assume she was straight though. Eventually, we find out through the DLC that this special friend she cared about was Riley, who used to be her roommate in the military boarding school Ellie was training in. I believe they were both training in. Eventually, Riley did run away, and She comes back one night to tell Ellie that she joined the Fireflies beyond the quarantine zone, and she wants to take Ellie out for a surprise, basically, and reconnect one final time before she leaves. Eventually, we find out this surprise is essentially an abandoned shopping mall. It has a lot of carousels, dancing stuff, arcades. It's supposedly clear of infected, so it should be safe. So we basically get to see two teenagers who have grown to love and care for one another, sharing a very special date in a dreary post-apocalyptic mall. It's a feel-good story. It felt natural. It even felt like something you might do, obviously minus the post-apocalypse landscape, revolutionary groups, and infected fungus monsters, right? They bond, they argue, they have realistic conversations, they play Mortal Kombat at the arcade, they even dance at like a makeshift studio with some speakers. And Riley keeps trying to persuade Ellie to run away with her, and she's very reluctant. Eventually Ellie does consider the possibility. They end up sharing a kiss. Again, it feels pretty natural. I got a sense at least of hope and happiness in what was a bleak world. I genuinely felt happy for both of them, and then you know what happened. Tragedy strikes, you feel their pain. So to me, these are all natural human emotions portrayed in a very realistic way by these characters who just happen to be lesbians. You're not being blasted in the face by their sexual orientation. There is another example which I'll cover quicker, and that is Bill and Frank from also The Last of Us 1, and specifically the episode 3 of The Last of Us series, which in my opinion is an example of game to TV series done great justice, right? So we knew from the first game Bill and Frank were gay, right? They're not being retconned as gay for the show. This is not Blizzard we're talking about, trying to make up for past workplace atrocity in the worst sneaky way possible, turning previous Overwatch characters gay for absolutely no reason, removing cleavage from female human soldiers from WoW Classic, a 20-year-old game that absolutely nobody asked for. So they're not doing that. They were gay. The Last of Us show just decided to expand on them and give them an entire episode, which to many was arguably the greatest episode of the entire season. So this was basically a story of how these two people met and died in this bleak, horrible, dreary world.
I'm not fighting about it. Back in bed.
I promise you I'm gonna stay up.
Why?
Because this is my last day.
It was nice. It was a touching story. I thought it was done great service by these actors. And again, being gay just was another characteristic of theirs. They had a lot more depth to them than just their sexual orientation. As with Ellie and Riley, we got to see them bond, we got to see them fight, they got close, they had close calls. But unlike Ellie and Riley, we actually got to see their story through till the end. Basically, two people who fell in love, got to carve out a little slice of paradise in this crazy world, made something for themselves. Characters, especially Bill, who found out there were others to live for other than just himself, right? We got to take a peek at their life. Some people had issue with the sex scene. Personally, I couldn't care less. I think all sex scenes are kind of superfluous and pointless.
I'm gonna give you my full pecker. Yeah, because of the pecs, but pecker's kind of like my dick.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. I understood what you meant by pecker.
Okay. Fill you with protein. Yeah. I'm gonna give you the protein you need to survive on your making muscles.
If I wanted to see actors do awkward dry humping and fake kissing, I just watched Love Island. So anyway, circling back to Concord, I do have a question for any LGBT people that might be watching this video. Does the inclusion of pronouns for these characters in Concord make you feel more included? I'm honestly asking. I can only speak for myself, but to me, the way studios implement some of these really do feel like they're just checking off checkboxes like, oh, add these pronouns here. That's how I perceive it. It doesn't feel genuine, but I'd love to hear from you. If you feel otherwise, and something like that, even as simple as adding pronouns to a character selector, makes you feel more included, please do let me know. But yeah, Concord had several issues going for it. Perhaps the most unforgivable would be that it cost a shit ton of money and it ended up being very, very mediocre. I'm not sure what Sony saw when they first met Firewalk Studios and they just had to buy them out. The production on there must have been very, very different than what we were presented with. So my point of that being, gamers have less and less tolerance for mediocre nonsense, basically. For too long, we were told the best we could have was white rice and boiled chicken. Then Elden Ring and Baldur's 3 came out and changed everything. There were others before that. These are recent examples. They had similar production costs to Concord, but the end result could not be any more different. If Concord was plain white rice and unseasoned chicken, imagine Baldur's Gate 3 was basically a decadent truffle risotto with a side of Wagyu beef drizzled with the rich black truffle sauce and garnished with edible gold leaf. Throw some filet mignons, lobster tails around there, caviar, black caviar all on the top. That's the difference, right? So games like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 scare mediocre developers who are afraid of trying and taking risk. They'll often whine about how unrealistic a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is, and even have the audacity to tell us that we shouldn't expect such games. I think we should expect more, honestly, and certainly more than the mediocre slop we've been given, which again costs just as much. So that's why games like Concord fail, and why I think they'll continue to fail as long as studios and developers have that mindset. If you chase greed and trends, you will be left with mediocre or at best average games. Studios and developers should be striving to outdo each other and create the next pinnacle in gaming, not the other way around. That's how you make true, timeless art. Gamers don't have countless hours to devote to every single game out there. We get picky, we gravitate towards the very best. The sales reflect that. It's the same thing in TV. Now, that's not to say there's no place for more mediocre games or B horror movies or things like that. We all have those that we love, right? Typically, though, those tend to have some charm or something to them that we gravitate to, something Concord's lacking. My point being, nobody wants to settle for mediocre, generic, run-of-the-mill games that are basically derivative of other games if they don't have to. So knowing all this, why do studios continue doing the opposite of getting what the audience wants and burning through hundreds of millions of dollars? Perhaps they like the drama, right? Toxicity. Maybe they love losing money. Maybe it's a weird kink. There's plenty of people out there that like to waste money paying others to degrade them. If these people pay a couple hundred or a couple thousand for the pleasure, could you just imagine for a second how much these executives and producers at these studios must be getting off wasting hundreds of millions of dollars? I guess we'll never know, or maybe we will next time. To close out this video, I'd like to talk about the gaming toxicity thing just a little bit more. It got brought up again with Black Myth Wukong. So what do I think about gaming toxicity? Often, in my opinion, it is just trolling from a younger, edgier audience. It always has. I think it always will be. Take me for example. Long ago, in the before times, at the dawn of time, before YouTube, before social media, before AI, imagine that 11, 12-year-old me, I would scour gaming forums, debating literally anyone who would listen, testing limits of moderators. Topics include which video games own, yours suck, my console owns, your console sucks.
Sup, bitches? It's Chad Warden here. Alright, I'm talking about that PS triple. The PS triple. I ain't talking about that Wii. That Wii shit. Shit, people will be talking about how it's all new and shit. But you know what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say is that, come on now, Wii? Come on, that little controller, baby, that looks like a dildo. I ain't trying to play my games with no dildo.
Things like that. I've said some really dumb shit on there, not because I ever actually believed what I was saying, but really just to get a rise out of people, right? I'm not proud of some of the dumb things I would say, but all I'm saying is a lot of people go through a similar phase, especially when they're younger. My point being, edginess and saying stupid shit is often part of gaming culture. It just is. Eventually we grow up, we realize the errors of our ways, for the most part. I'm not going to sit here on my Iron Throne and preach and say I'm a Reformed Baptist and I've never said an inappropriate thing ever again in my life. That would be lying, right? And anyone that's telling you that is probably lying. Yes, as we grow up, we realize maybe things that were acceptable back then aren't now. We change with the times, as we should be. But occasionally you'll still joke around within a group of friends or gamer buddies or something like that. The point is, if everyone's in on the joke and they understand the context, that's different. And context is truly everything. To erode context in the name of social justice is to deny freedom of expression and the nuance of words. Now, freedom of expression does not mean freedom to go out and start yelling racist shit or homophobic slurs. And also do realize that freedom of expression comes with freedom to get fucked if you say some truly egregious shit, right? My point is, just try to be a good person. There's a difference between joking around and legitimate malice. Actual malice and spite are indefensible. It's reprehensible, right? If you let it consume you, it will only drag you down into the abyss with it. It's a dark, cold, lonely place. You don't want to be there. There you have it, right? Those are my thoughts on modern games, movies, TV series, media, and why I think they fail, and why forced, inauthentic DEI can often contribute to that. But what do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you vehemently disagree with me? Am I toxic because I'm just a me gamer? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video and found that you got any value out of it, please feel free to subscribe. It will help the channel out. This is my first time ever asking for any subscriptions, so I'm not even gonna lie, I am kind of nervous. Do not feel obligated to subscribe at all. But if you do, know that it is very much appreciated. I'll be making more of this type of content in the future. I do other stuff as well, mostly focused around gaming. If there is anything you'd like me to cover, definitely let me know. My name is Dima. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.